tzaddikim is equal the burning of the Bet HaMikdash. There's other Ma'amari Chazal ke'enze, but we see over here that the concept of it's equal. It's equal. There's also another Gemara in Masechet Shabbat that says that En mevatlin tinokot shel bet Rabban bishvil binyan bet HaMikdash. The construction of the Bet HaMikdash does not override the learning of the tinokot shel bet Rabban, the learning of the children. Because learning of the children is more important. Rabbi Chaver explains because the learning of the children is pure, without any chet whatsoever, and it's the Yachinu Boaz, it's the pillars that the Bet HaMikdash is based on, is standing on, and that's why it takes precedence. And the Maral explains because there's no chet by the Tinukot Shel Bet Rabban, it even precedes the Binyan Bet HaMikdash. But the Gemara over there in Masechet Shabbat says still in the pasuk, Al tigu b'mshihai u'b'nviyai al tareu, that Al tigu b'mshihai is going on the children, the Tinukot Shel Bet Rabban. But however, the Niviyai al tareu, you shouldn't approach the Nevi'im like the Talmidei Chachamim. Talmidei Chachamim are called the Nevi'im. So there's a level that even though the Tinokot Shel Bet Rabban have a purity of chet, there's also the Nevi'im, the Talmidei Chachamim, have a level that doesn't surpass the Bet HaMikdash, but as we see, it's Kesrifat Bet Eloheinu. It's equal. It's equal. When the Talmid Chacham is niftar, it's like the Bet HaMikdash is not around. Why? Well, what's the essence of a Talmid Chacham? So it's obvious that the Talmid Chacham represents the Shechina. Talmid Chacham represents the kesher, the connection that Am Yisrael has to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Just like the Bet HaMikdash was there, and we would always consult the Bet HaMikdash by the Urim V'Tumim, and when somebody had harata, he wanted to bring a korban. When somebody needed direction, when somebody needed inspiration, he would go to the Bet HaMikdash, because that's where the Makom HaShechina. So too, a Talmid Chacham. We go to a Talmid Chacham for direction, for guidance. That is because a Talmid Chacham is the representation of Torah, the manifestation. Rabbi Elyashiv explains that we can't access the Torah so easily, but it's through the Talmid Chacham we get a picture of what the Torah is. And that's why Rabbi Elyashiv, Zichrono Livracha, who left us during these 9 days, really drives home the point of what it is, another Bet HaMikdash that's lost. It's not only another Bet HaMikdash. Rabbi Elyashiv represented the quintessential, the Talmid Chacham, the dugma of the Talmid Chacham, of the Gadol Ador in the generation. That's what Rabbi Elyashiv was. So I think it's incumbent upon us to understand who this Rabbi Elyashiv was. That close to 500,000 people went out to be milaveh him to his final destination. It must be that he was a tremendous public speaker, an orator, of tremendous charisma and persuasion in the political field, tremendous wealth and power for such a leader. Rav Wolbe once said that the leaders of Am Yisrael are the biggest proof of our emunah. The leaders that we have in Am Yisrael are the biggest proofs of Torah min hashamayim. HaTorah is true. Rav Elyashiv is a product of what the Torah wants from us and what the Torah is. So let's try to understand who this Rav Elyashiv, who sat in his Bet Midrash, in his house and in his Bet Midrash consistently for close to a century. Who was this Rabbi Elyashiv, and where did he come from? And what do we learn what do we learn from Rabbi Elyashiv? What is our lesson? That's what I want to just discuss for a few minutes as a Hakdama, for the words of Harav Agon, Harav Shmulevitz, who will give us further inspiration. It started when he grew on the knees of the Leshem. The Leshem was one of the greatest Mikubalim in the previous generations. His grandfather already saw Gadlut in Rabbi Elyashiv, that he didn't go play around. From an early age, he was quiet, a quiet boy. Really, they didn't know what was going to become of him. That his friends didn't really know what his level of learning. Even when he was in Kollel, they thought he was just the Mishnayos Zagar. He was the one who would learn his Mishnayot on his own. I know people. One of his grandchildren told me that he used to learn in the Kollel with Rav Vosner and the Tzitz Eliezer, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, great Geonim in the Kollel, and everyone would have their mahalich. Everyone would have what to say. Rabbi Elyashiv would always sit in a corner. He would be very, very quiet. But every question he would say, it's a Mefurish Gemara. They say Mefurish Gemara. They all knew Shas. So what happened? These people all knew Shas. It says he always had his approach in the Gemara that he would always say, he would always have his approach, and from then people started to get to know him much better. But he was always quiet. He never really was out there. He never spoke publicly. But who was Rabbi Elyashiv? Rabbi Elyashiv was the following. This is a student of his, Rabbi Ben Cook, a very close student of him for many years, said this week the following, and I think this is, out of all of the stories that you're going to hear from Rabbi Elyashiv, the point that I would like to share with you is the following. You're not going to hear stories by Rabbi Elyashiv how he sat for 3 days straight without eating or sleeping and just involved in learning, falling asleep on his stender, standing up or backwards. You're not going to hear those stories. What you're going to hear from Rabbi Elyashiv is a very, very simple story. It's one line. He would go to sleep every night between 10:30 and 11. He would wake up at 2:30. He would start his day learning. Then he would learn for a good 16 to 20 hours. Not once a week, but every single day for close to 100, for close to 80, between 80 to 100 years. That was his Seder Hayom. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach recounts as his son, Rabbi Israel Auerbach, married Rabbi Elyashiv's daughter. At the wedding, Rabbi Elyashiv goes over to Rav Shlomo Zalman around 10:30. Mazal tov, I have to go home. I have a very busy schedule tomorrow. What was his very busy schedule? He wakes up at 2:30 in the morning, and he continues, and he started his day. His grandson once came home, very tired. He said, "Well, what were you doing?" He said, "I stayed up all night. I had mishmar. I stayed up all night." He says, "Well, what do you gain from that? You're going to be tired tomorrow. You're not going to be able to know how to use your kochot properly. You're going to be wiped up." "I never in my life stayed up all night learning," said Rabbi Elyashiv. "I never in my life stayed up all night learning." It was every day, from his teenage years till his past 100 years old, he would have the same Seder Hayom, day in, day out, consistency. And that's who Rabbi Elyashiv was. Rabbi Elyashiv was the Urim V'Tumim. Everything that we're going to hear around that was mikoach, the koach HaTorah that Rabbi Elyashiv built himself to be. I mean, the statements that we've heard over the years about who Rabbi Elyashiv was are things that is hard for us to relate to. When at the time when Rabbi Elyashiv gave his psak on the kvarim that they're able to be moved, and lo aleinu, they were mevazeh, some of the zealots will come were mevazeh Rabbi Elyashiv in public. So Rabbi Shmuel Auerbach got up and said that Rabbi Elyashiv, who was at the time of the Noda B'Yehuda, one of the great Aharonim, he would have been considered a gadol. And Rabbi Shlomo Zalman said he would have been at the time of Rabbi Akiva Eger. He would have been considered a big chidush in his generation. I remember I was once in his house. I opened up the Sefer Or L'Tzion of Rabbi Ben Zion Abba Shaul, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. I'm afraid to tell you in public what Rabbi Ben Zion wrote on the inside cover to Rabbi Elyashiv. What type of shvachim, how he categorized him, who he was. It's scary. I'm not even going to say it. The tremendous ha'aracha that all the Gedolei Yisrael held. Rabbi Elyashiv just gives us an idea, an inkling. Rabbi Shmuel Auerbach recounts that he has a whole sefer that he wrote on Masechet Ohalot, one of the easier Masechtot in Shas. For 13 years, he delved in the subject of Ohalot. I meant that as obviously as a joke, because Ohalot is extremely complicated. After Rabbi Shmuel left the home of Rabbi Elyashiv, after discussing with him Ohalot, he came up with Chalishut Adat. There's Rabbi Shmuel Auerbach saying that I can't believe I've gone through every single nook and cranny Masechet Ohalot, and everything to Rabbi Elyashiv is clear as if he learned it yesterday, and nothing was a chidush to him. He had everything down packed. Remember, I once asked him a certain important question that I had in halakha, that I held was important to the halakha, about a certain opinion of the Pri Hadash in Hilchot Pesach. Pri Hadash is an acharon, not on the main page, small writing in the back of the Shulchan Aruch. And, I was young, and I was, I guess, a little bit chutzpahdik. And so when you're into something, you think obviously everybody else knows what you're talking about, like the Pri Hadash in Pesach, right? So I asked Rabbi Elyashiv, so what would be the halacha here? He answered, what would be the halacha there? Yeah. I say, so the halacha is not like the Pri Hadash in. Says, yeah, no, not like that Pri Hadash in Pesachim. And for me, it was like obvious. Yeah, that Pri Hadash, of course. Like an obscure little Pri Hadash that I didn't even imagine. It wasn't such a famous Pri Hadash. He knew exactly. Yes, this is the deal. This is that, and the halacha is not like him. There's rayas. He knew all of the little opinions, every single detail. Kol haTorah kula was galui lefanav. He was the embodiment. He was the representation of Torah. Now let's try to understand that a little bit more on a deeper level. That Rav Kook mentioned the following point. What Rabbi Elyashiv was a Talmid Chacham that at a young age he was still contemplating what mehalech, what derech to take in his limud, in his approach to learning. Once he had that decision made, it's a very important point. Once he had that decision made, nothing swayed him. Not the Yetzer Hara, not the Yetzer HaTov. Nothing swayed him. You could come with this, you could come with that. And there's the chesed this day, and then there's this movement this day. There could be the most important people coming to meet you this. Nothing. He knew exactly what he had to do. He knew exactly what his mission in life was, what his purpose in life was, and nothing distracted him. Nothing was mibalbel him. Nothing mixed him up. This is a lesson for us that we could also learn, that we have to know, each and every one of us, what we're here for, what we're here to do. We have to have our focus, because there are many, many things that could be mibalbel us. Rabbi Elyashiv had his clear focus, his mission, Torah and only Torah. Everything else was around. The ambassador to the United States, to the United States, who was living in America, went to Rabbi Elyashiv, this is not long ago, less than a year ago, to discuss with him all of the different potential problems if Iran attacks, and what should America do, and all world issues. And Rabbi Elyashiv is there in front of his Gemara. He said, I don't answer if it doesn't come halacha l'maaseh yet. I can't speculate. He would say that many times. I'm not going to speculate. And he told him how he felt it was a very, very clear threat of Iran. Nothing more than that. The people around said he saw that basically the ambassador finished more or less what he's saying. He's saying, okay, very good. He opens back some more, he's back in. It could be the world issues, what's going on. He felt that there's nothing more that he could help with. He doesn't care who's sitting there. He went back to his learning. Like he was 5 minutes ago. Focus. There's when the airplane during Entebbe was hijacked, the Israeli government didn't know what to do then. This is not a well-known story. I heard this story from my Rebbe, who was Rabbi Elyashiv's son-in-law, and I heard it from somebody who heard it from him actually, and it's not a story that's well known. Just to give you an idea how it doesn't have that our Gdolei Israel from within they're Urim V'Tumim, just like the Bet HaMikdash is there, and that spreads light to things that we don't even know about. When the raid on Entebbe happened, the Israeli government did not know whether they should risk attacking or not attacking. It was a very huge risk, as you all know. Middle of the night, because they didn't want any of the media to find out, Yitzhak Rabin, which was then the prime minister, went with a couple of other people to the house of Rav Zolti, who was the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim at the time, and asked, what should they do? Rav Zolti said, I cannot answer this question. They all went to Rabbi Elyashiv in the middle of the night. Rabbi Elyashiv thought very, very hard. He had two Gemarot. There was a skira in Masechet Gitin, in the Tosfot in Masechet Gitin, whether in Pidyon Shivuyim, whether you're allowed to, according to halacha, to embark in such a dangerous operation. He felt, according to halacha, one is allowed, and they went with it. They gave that. He gave his bracha, and from then the raid in Entebbe happened. But there was so many different monumental incidents in Am Yisrael that were guided through him. But they were guided through him not in a way that he would go out and he would force his opinion. He would say things. He was sitting bitoch arba amot shel halacha, just like the Bet HaMikdash was there, and the Shechina shone on its own. Torah is pure in its own right. Torah does not have to be marketed. Torah doesn't have to be made what it's not. The purity of Torah has that effect on Am Yisrael. And that has the effect to the point that close to half a million Jews stopped their daily life. I spoke to people in Yerushalayim, people were sleeping on the streets. There was nobody in their houses that night in Yerushalayim. Nobody stayed in their house. Women, children, everyone walked outside just to be milaveh gadol to his final destination. And therefore, as concluding my part of the little divrei hesped that we can say for such the magnitude of the loss of the gadol, and this is from what I understand. I was giving a shiur last night, and somebody mentioned to me he reads the different newspapers. He said, and he didn't know who really Rabbi Elyashiv was. He doesn't come to the Kollel so often. He said, who is this Rabbi Elyashiv? I saw in the Globe and Mail a whole page article. I saw in the National Post they have a whole, and so what do they say? How do the goyim who have no idea really what Torah is, how do they perceive him? Well, what they talk about is a Jew who lived in modest dwellings, a 2-room apartment, and raised a large family there. And by the way, towards the middle of his life, he was receiving a very large pension because he was paid as one of the Supreme Court judges. It's because he was appointed the chief rabbi when he went out at a certain point in his life. He accepted that position. He didn't touch. I heard from one of his grandchildren, didn't touch any of the money. Him and his wife had a deal. They hated money. There was no way you could ever get him to accept any money. There were people who would always try to get him to accept certain things. Elevators, chairs. If you ever walked into his apartment, you saw the rickety floors. They refused to install a normal kitchen. And when I tried to ask some of the people there, why don't you do something like this? They looked at me like I'm crazy. Do you think that he would dare ever have any change in his apartment? So this is a person. How do you explain? This is how the Globe and Mail and other newspapers had trouble explaining that this giant had tremendous humility, and this is how he was. They are able to put it into words that he shunned any personal self-interest, any monetary bribery, any political persuasion that he felt wasn't emet, didn't matter to him. There was one thing that mattered to him: the word of God. And they hit it on the ball. Really, this is what Rabbi Elyashiv represents to us. The Talmid Chacham that we started discussing, which is like losing the Bet HaMikdash. This is what we lost. We lost the dugma of what Torah is. Like Rav Yitzchak Isaac Chaver explains, we don't have Torah. We don't have the ability to properly understand what the Torah wants from us in every situation. And when we have a Talmid Chacham in the generation that was able to give us that dugma, this is what Torah is about. This is Torah. And it's gone. And we never imagined the day where we would be without Rabbi Elyashiv. We never imagined the day we would be without Rabbi Elyashiv. And hopefully the Geulah is very, 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 very close. But we have to realize at least what we had and what we're missing. But that should be the greatest Ilu Neshama, Yehi Ratzon, that Rabbi Elyashiv should be that final Melitz Yosher that should push the final push of the Heble Mashiach, that finally the Geulah should come. Rabbi Amenu. Without further ado, we ask Rabbi Shmulevitz to address us. B'chavod.
Shows the Rosh Kollel. It's hard to add to the words of Rosh Kollel. He covered basically Rabbi Elyashiv. I just want to start off with two stories about Rabbi Elyashiv's mother. Rabbi Elyashiv's parents hadn't had children for 17 years. Rabbi Elyashiv was the only son, and she would cry on the porch. She would never cry in the house. She would always cry on the porch that she didn't have any children. One day her father, the Baal Elyashiv, walked by. Heilige Baal Elyashiv walked by, and he hears her crying on the porch. And he asks her, "Why are you crying?" It's because I want a son. She says, "Why are you crying on the porch?" She says, "I don't want to disturb my husband from learning. I don't want to disturb my husband from learning. I only cry on the porch." So the Leshem told her, "For not disturbing, you deserve a son." And she had a son. And the other story about her, it said that she had the son right after this story. It used to be, now we have washing machines, but in those times, 100 years ago, it was called Yom HaKfisa, the day you did laundry. The day you did laundry was a day completely given over to doing laundry. It was an avodah gedolah. That's why we don't do laundry now during the 9 days. So we shouldn't be Mesiach Das from Avelis. When you did laundry, you were Mesiach Das from everything else. And Rabbi Elyashiv's mother did laundry. It was her Yom HaKfisa. And she hung up the laundry. And a neighbor who was walking by sees the laundry hanging, and she couldn't walk through the yard. She had to walk around the yard. So she got angry, this neighbor. And she went into her house and took a pair of scissors and cut down the line, and the laundry fell on the floor. It got dirty. Rabbi Elyashiv's mother came outside, saw what happened, was about to get angry. She picked up the laundry, did it again, and hung it up again in a different place. She controlled herself. When her husband came home, she was about to tell him what happened, at least to get it off her chest. What she went through that day, and she decided not to disturb him, not to burden him with her issues, and she didn't say anything to him either. She held the tsar in. While she was in the house, a knock on the door comes, and that neighbor comes, the one who cut down the laundry, and she's begging mechila for what she did. And Rabbi Elyashiv's father looking at her, "What happened here?" And the neighbor said, "I got my punishment already. My son is sick. Please be meichel me." And Rabbi Elyashiv's father realized that his Rebbetzin didn't tell anybody about what happened. She controlled herself not to disturb her husband and not to make machlokes. And he said it right after that she got pregnant. Rosh Kollel says, he spoke about how Rabbi Elyashiv was like the Beis Hamikdash. The Chazal tell us, "Koshe silukim shel chachmei Yisrael kiflayim kechurban Beis Hamikdash." When the Talmid Chacham dies, it's twice as bad as the Churban Beis Hamikdash. The Gadol Ador, the Pesach Ador, the Masmid Ador, as was said before, Rav Shlomo Zalman said that if Rabbi Elyashiv would have lived in the time of the Heilig Chassam Sofer, he would have been a Chiddush. It would have been a Davar Pella. Even in the time of Chassam Sofer, the Yediyas HaTorah, the Asmanas HaTorah, that type of Talmid Chacham would have been a Chiddush even in the times of the Chassam Sofer. Chaim Kanevsky, who is a Yid, who knows Kol HaTorah Kula, said that whenever he spoke to his shver, his father-in-law, Rabbi Elyashiv, he never was able to tell him a chiddush. There's nothing that he was able to say over that Rabbi Elyashiv didn't know already or didn't think about. In all his life, he never was able to tell his shver a chiddush. It's a churban Beis Hamikdash. Chazal tell us, why is it a Beis Hamikdash? When Yom Shechara Beis Hamikdash Ein Lo Kodesh Baruch Hu Ela Daled Al Mishal Halacha B'Lvad. The Beis Hamikdash B'Yameinu Darshoras Hashchina is the Daled Al Mishal Halacha B'Lvad. And Rabbi Elyashiv, he was the Daled Al Mishal Halacha B'Lvad. He was the Makam Hashras Hashchina. Through him came the Hashpah of Toras Emes, of Halacha Brura, of Shmaitza Libid Hilchasa to Klal Yisrael. This is just like the Churban is a personal availus for each one of us. Rabbi Elyashiv's Ptira is a personal availus for each one of us. Chaim Kanevsky tore Kriya, Rabbi Shmulevitz tore Kriya, and Rabbi Rafael Shmulevitz was practically the same age as Rabbi Elyashiv, a little younger. When he heard about it, he also writes Kriya. Everybody felt it was a personal loss to them. It's interesting, we're holding now by Tisha B'Av. When somebody chas v'shalom, le'aleichem loses a karev, the Avela starts after the P'tira. The Shiva starts after the P'tira. When we lost the Beis Hamikdash, our Avela starts before the P'tira. Rosh Chodesh, Shivas B'Tammuz, Rosh Chodesh, Shmuel Shechalbay, Erev Tisha B'Av. But the Avela starts before the P'tira. And by a Karev, the Avela starts after the P'tira. The pshat is because when you're dealing with Avelas for the Korban Beis Hamikdash, we have no asag of what we lost. The only way we can have asag of what we lost and really feel the pain and really feel the loss, if we prepare beforehand. If we sit shiva beforehand, if we think about what we lost beforehand, then on Tisha B'Av we can realize the loss. But when you lose a karev, you don't need any achana, you don't need any preparation. You realize what you lost on the day of the P'tira. You could start the shiva later, but for the Korban Beis Hamikdash, you have to prepare for that shiva. When we lose a tzaddik, it's worse than the Korban Beis Hamikdash. At least by the Beis Hamikdash, we knew what we had. We knew that Asar Nisim. When somebody walked into Beis Hamikdash, he saw 10 Nisim on a daily basis. Because I'll tell us, when you walked on the Ritzpas HaBeis Hamikdash, when you walked on the floor of the Beis Hamikdash, you felt infused with Chachma. You were absorbing Chachma. That's why you weren't allowed to wear shoes. There shouldn't be a hefsek between you and the floor. Just standing on the Makom Kaddish, you felt the Chachma going through you. The Ashpos HaChachma. We read when we say the Slichas after the Chodesh Yom Kippurim on Yom Kippur, Ein Lanu this, Ein Lanu. We're missing all those things, but at least we have a sag of what we had. When you lose a tzaddik, when you lose a Talmid Chacham, we have no preparation before, and we don't have any asag of what we lost. It was kula b'tzina. In the Beis Hamikdash, it's kula b'golah. Everything was b'golah. There was no nist of a klal in the Beis Hamikdash. All the nisim were there for everybody to see. They lifted up the lechem upon him, and everybody saw it was fresh, and everybody saw it was warm. You saw the nisim b'golah. Rabbi Elyashiv, you didn't see anything. He sat in a room in the Oil Sorah Shul, in the Tiferes Bachurim Shul, in his house for 80, 90 years. Alone. With tznius. Learning Basmada 18, 20 hours a day. He was a different suk. And we don't really understand what we lost. It's very hard for us to be Bavela. It's a lot worse than a Beis Hamikdash. At least in Beis Hamikdash, we could mourn. Over here, it's very hard for us to mourn. Because nothing was begoli. It was all benista. It's in it. After he got married, he married the daughter of the tzaddik of Yerushalayim, Rabbi Levin, the Rav of the prisoners, Rabbi Levin, the Bavus the tzaddik, Rabbi, the tzaddik Rabbi. And he married his daughter. And after they got married, after Sheva Bracha, she came over to her husband, Rabbi Elyashiv, and wanted to discuss, setting up the house. So Rabbi Elyashiv asked her a favor. He says, I want to ask you a favor. I want some time after the wedding to be able to learn day and night, uninterrupted. Beli hefsek, uninterrupted day and night. Will you do me that favor and give me the time? So she said, the tzaddik's daughter, she said, I'm asking. She asked her, how many days do you want? How many days do you want? So Elyashiv said, I want 1,000 days. 1,000 days, he said. That's what I want. So she said, I'm masking. She was masking. And he went into the oil Sarah shul, that's what he learned. But Beli hefsek, for 1,000 days, he didn't stop learning. 18, 20 hours a day. He didn't stop learning. And when the deal was over, when the 1,000 days was over, they extended it. They extended it to about 102 years. The deal never ended. She never, ever interrupted Rabbi Elyashiv from his learning. Ever. When she was sick, she died before Rabbi Elyashiv. When she was sick, and she was suffering from terrible coughs, and it was the winter time, and the grandson was living in the house. And one night he gets up, and he sees Rebbe Elyashiv going out to the porch, and it was cold outside, and she was coughing. And he asked her, why are you on the porch coughing? You're sick. You're going to get sicker by standing outside. So she says, I don't want to cough in the house. The Rav, my husband, might worry about me, and it's interrupting from my learning. She would walk out to the porch whenever she had to cough, in order not to not interrupt. A deal was a deal, and she kept the deal. One night, one of her children had it looked like what it was, an appendix, and she didn't know what to do. So she decided, I never disturb my husband, but it could be that the kid has an appendix. I want to know what to do. So she goes to the Beis Medrash, and she's about to knock on the window or the door of the Beis Medrash, and she hears Rabbi Elyashiv's niggin, his song. There was a certain niggin Rabbi Elyashiv learnt with. His whole life he used the same niggin. And she heard the niggin, and she was mesmerized by the niggin. And she said, I can't do it. She turned around and walked back. On the way back, she decided, but the kid might have appendix. And she walked back again, and she heard the niggin a second time. She turned back around. She did it 3 times. The 3rd time she came back. She was about to knock on the door and ask Rabbi Elyashiv what to do, and she said, I can't interrupt. And she turned around, and she didn't interrupt. Rabbi Elyashiv was medactic on every second. Rabbi Elyashiv was a sandik thousands and thousands of times. He never turned down a sandikoros. But before the sandikoros, before you made up with him at a bris, he said you have to be there on time, and it has to work like clockwork. Every bris. Once there was a bris, and after the bris, they went over to Rabbi Elyashiv, and they said the whole thing, maybe it was a few bris, and they told Rabbi Elyashiv it wasn't bad. The whole thing took only 20 minutes. Only 20 minutes, that's it. Rabbi Elyashiv said, no, it took 22 minutes. 2 extra minutes. He kept cheshbon. Kept cheshbon for those 2 extra 2 minutes. He would sleep 4 hours a night, from 10 to 2. Once a Israeli government minister came to him to speak to him at night, and it was about 10 o'clock, and the person spoke to him till 10:30. And then Rabbi Elyashiv went to sleep, and he got up a half hour earlier. His Zainikul asked him, his grandson asked him, why are you getting up a half hour earlier? He said, that guy used up a half hour of my time. Half hour of my time is a half hour of my time. I have to repay it. I have to give it back. Rabbi Elyashiv lived in a very small apartment. If anybody was ever in Rabbi Elyashiv, it was nothing. The apartment was nothing. Shach went to visit Rabbi Elyashiv, and he looks around the apartment. He says, over here you raised 10 children. 10 children in this place. Then he smiled. Rav Shach said, no. Rabbi Levine also raised his children in this type of apartment. I understand where it's coming from. There was a Yid, Rabbi Yosef Karlbach. He was a Yid. He was a Rav in Germany between the First and Second World War. And there was a delegation of German Rabbanim in the 1930s who went to Europe to help out the poverty, to help out the communities, the poverty-stricken community in Europe, and they had a fund, and they went there in order to give money and alleviate the hardships of the poverty. So this Rabbi Yosef Kalbach wrote memoirs, and one of the things he wrote in his memoir was like this. He says, I visited two homes. I visited the home of Rabbi Chaim Oizer, and I visited the home of the Chavetz Chaim, the Heilige Chavetz Chaim. He said, when I walked into the home of Rabbi Chaim Oizer, I had a glimpse of what Malchus, of what a Melech Yisrael looks like. I had a glimpse of what a Melech Yisrael looks like. Rabbi Chaim Oizer would sit on at his desk. Thousands of questions would come to him every day. Every day. From all corners of the world. And anybody who had any issue, Almanis, Yisayim, Yeshiva Barachim, Shalom Bayit, anything came to his house and he would answer everything. It was like a marketplace. Reb Chaim Oizer's house. Hundreds of people would be milling around in the house, and every question would come to Reb Chaim Oizer, and he would answer right away. So he said, I had a glimpse of what it looks like in Melech Yisrael. Then he says, I went into the Chavetz Chaim's house. I walked into the Chavetz Chaim's house. Over there I had a different glimpse. He said, I had a glimpse of what Olam Haba looks like. So now I saw what Olam Haba looks like. What does Olam Haba look like? There was no Olam Hasa in the Chavetz Chaim's house. There are only two Olamas in this world. There's an Olam Hasa and Olam Haba. If you're not in Olam Hasa, you're in Olam Haba. In the Chavetz Chaim's house, there was no Olam Hasa. Tzadikim yoshim v'atereseim v'resheim v'nenim v'ziv hashchim. Says, I had a glimpse of what, we don't know what Olam Haba looks like, but now we know a little what Olam Haba looks like. The Chavetz Chaim's house. There was a dirt floor in the Chavetz Chaim's house with a few broken benches and a broken table, and that's it. And that's what Olam Haba looks like. Shein Olam Haba. When you walked into Rabbi Elyashiv's house, you felt like you were walking out of Olam Hasa and walking into Olam Haba. I think if Rabbi Yosef Kalbach would have been around in Yerushalayim, he would have said the same thing. It was a glimpse of Olam Haba. It was a churva. 10 kids, 2 rooms, 2 bedrooms, that's it in the house. There was nothing there. I remember walking in, I was hit right away by the picture, the famous picture, a painting or a picture. I think in his house it was a painting of the Baal Elyashiv. That was the painting. And there was nothing else. There was just Svarim. We knew that it was a Yid sitting there learning 18, 20 hours a day. You walked out of Olam Hasa and you walked into Olam Haba. Eze ben Olam Haba, Shayach Oil, Shayach Nafu, V'asik Be'raisa Tadira, V'hichsik Tevusa L'nafshe. He was a humble man. The Under Mikol Adam. He didn't take credit. He didn't even feel that he was a masman. There was a sefer that came out, a biography. I see it's laying on the table here. It came out b'chayav in his lifetime, and they did it without his permission. And he wasn't so happy with it. And then he says like this: as long as what says in there is the truth, maybe somebody will get inspired to learn. As long as it's the truth. So he asked, what's the name of the sefer? So they told him the name of the sefer is Hashakta. So he says, even the name of the sefer is a lie. The name of the sefer is not Hashakta. Hashakta means the master. He says, how could the book be true if the name is already false? So Mezoyif Metoyf. Even the Masman Ador, the name is not right. And that's what we had. We had Rabbi Elyashiv. In his later years, Rabbi Elyashiv, in his early years, he didn't give time to anybody. Nothing. He wasn't there. He was not Masur L'Tzibur. In his later years, he decided to be more Masur L'Tzibur, and he told the Hava Korsa Tov to the Tzibur. The only reason why I was able to overcome all my illnesses and we continue learning was because of the Tfilas Atzibur. And I have a curse I took to the Tzibur. And I have to give them of my time. They gave me time in this world because of their Tfilas, and I have to give them my time. When Nebuchadnezzar came to Yerushalayim to destroy the Beis Hamikdash, Plato, Afalton, went with him. And after the Churban Beis Hamikdash, Afalton, Plato was walking around in the Har HaBayis, and he sees near the Har HaBayis Yirmiyahu Hanavi crying, sitting on the floor and crying. And he knew who Yirmiyahu Hanavi was. So he goes over to Yirmiyahu, and he says, "You're such a chacham. I have two questions for you. What are you crying about? A building. A building is only sticks and stones. Who cries over a building?" So it was his first question. And then the second question is, why are you crying now? Who cries over spilled milk? It's gone already. It's not here anymore. Why are you crying over spilled milk? Those were his two questions. So Yirmiyahu turns to Plato and he says, "You're known as a smart man, one of the smartest men in the world. Are there any questions that you ever had in your life that you couldn't resolve? That remain questions to you? Anything that you couldn't resolve in your life?" So Plato said, "There's many questions that I had that I couldn't resolve." So Yirmiyahu Hanavi looks at him and says, Ask me the questions." And Plato starts asking the questions, and before he could ask the question, Yirmiyahu already had an answer. One after another, Yirmiyahu was answering. The questions that Plato couldn't resolve in his whole life, Yirmiyahu was answering Kalachayat. The Ramah brings down this story. And Plato's looking at him as if he's not a human being. And then he tells to Plato, "You know where all my chachma comes from? Where all my wisdom comes from? From these sticks and stones. That's where my wisdom comes from. And that's why I'm crying. Because that we lost. That we lost." And then he tells him, in the second question he asks, "How come we're crying? It's done already. It's destroyed already. Why are we crying for the past?" So Yirmiyahu tells him like this, "I have an answer, but you wouldn't understand the answer. You wouldn't understand the answer. No matter how I'm going to explain it to you, you wouldn't understand it." The Alter from Kellam used to say, the answer is that we're not crying for the past, we're crying for the future. Those tears will rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. Goyim build with cement and Jews build with tears. It's a Jewish concept. We don't build with stones and bricks, we build with tears. Chaim Volozhin built the yeshiva in Volozhin. Brisker used to say they didn't need water for the cement. Reb Chaim Volozhin had so many tears that they were able to mix the cement with Reb Chaim Volozhin's tears. And that's why Reb Chaim Volozhin's yeshiva was the Ema yeshivas. All the yeshivas that we have are from Volozhin. And the kiyum of all yeshivas were Reb Chaim Volozhin's tears. We build with tears. Sharet Morris Leninol. Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchever, by Hasidim, they have a meaning by when they go to the chuppah, at the Kabbalah's Panim, they have a badchen. And the badchen says Musa to the chassan. And he wouldn't go to be Messiah Kedushin until the badchen brought the chassan to tears. Once the chassan started crying, he says, "Now we can go to the chuppah." Jews build with tears. If we're building a Beis Hamikdash, if we're building a new bayis, whenever we're building, it has to be with tears. We lost the Beis Hamikdash. The Beis Hamikdash was the source, the ashpah of all our chachma. Yirmiyahu was able to answer every question that Alfalton had. Rabbi Elyashiv was able to answer hundreds of thousands of questions, hundreds of thousands of shilas. There was never anything like this. You make some seifel. Every question that was posed to him, anything, from the hardest things in Shas, from the hardest halachas from all over the world, he would be able to answer kalachayat, mutter, aser, in a minute. That Beis HaMikdash we lost. The Gemara says in Megillah. The Gemara says in Megillah that when they were Matargim the Nevi'im, when they translated the Nevi'im, Yonis ibn Azil was translated it. V'nizdaze Eretz Yisrael arba meis parsal, arba meis parsal. When they translated the Nevi'im into Tirgum, there was an earthquake in Eretz Yisrael. 400 parsa, 400 parsa. The whole Eretz Yisrael shook. And the Taisus read, one of the Rishonim explained, why did it shake? Ma'hazizua. So he says that until they were Matargim the Nevi'im, you needed Amelis to understand what it says there. Once they were Matargim the Nevi'im, the amount of Amelis that was needed to understand what it says in the Pasuk was less. You need less Yigiyah. Because there was less Amelis B'Torah, the foundations of Eretz Yisrael shook. In other words, what does it say in this Gemara? The foundations of Eretz Yisrael, the Yesod of the Olam, is Amelis B'Torah. And if there's less Amelis B'Torah, then there's a structural defect in the foundations. And the whole Eretz Yisrael shakes. This past week, Nizdaz Eretz Yisrael, Arba Meis Parsa, Al Arba Meis Parsa. Literally. Yasmodas HaTorah of 18 hours a day for 90 years, which held up Eretz Yisrael, there's a structural defect in the Yesodis of Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara says, who's an Apikoros? Amr Rabbi Yosef, the Gemara says, Sanhedrin. There's people that say, Ma'ahana le Rabbona, of what benefit do we have from Talmidei Chachamim? L'didei kar, l'didei tanim. They're sitting alone, they're learning for themselves, they're harving for themselves, they're learning for themselves. We have no benefit from them. We have no benefit of a 100-year-old Jew sitting in a room by himself learning. And the Gemara says that's an apikoros. And Rashi explains why. V'heim einim yoidim. Those people don't understand. Sha'aleim miskayim ha'olam. Sha'olam miskayim aleim. They don't understand that the Talmidei Chachamim, aleim olam, the aleim miskayim ha'olam. They're holding up the world. L'didi kar, l'didi tani, das is apikoros. Rabbi Elyashiv was holding up our world. He was holding up the whole world. I once heard from Shalosh Fadranowitz. It's a funny story, but he was driving to Lakewood and he passed the Verrazano Bridge. Some people know where the Verrazano Bridge is. It's between Brooklyn and Staten Island. It's a suspension bridge. It's held up by cables. The bridge is a heavy bridge, but the cables are strong cables that hold up the bridge. What does it take to hold up a bridge like the Verrazano Bridge? These huge cables, hundreds of them. He says, what does it take to hold up the world? That yeshiva bracha that's sitting Thursday night in yeshiva, learning the Rashba, he's holding up the world. A lot bigger than the Verrazano Bridge. He's holding up the world. Shalem Miskayim Ha'olam. And if somebody doesn't believe that, Chas v'shalom, he's apikoros. He's pashat apikoros. Chavetz Chaim once came to a Chanukas Habayis of a hospital. In those times, the way it worked is they came, the rich people came, the Gvirim came, and the Kvoidim, the Chavetz Chaim came. He came with Bachram from his yeshiva. And he was standing there with his Bachram. The way they did it then is each person donated beds. Like I donate 5 beds, I donate 6 beds, and you donated the beds and the rooms that it took for those beds to occupy and all the equipment that you needed for those beds. So one person said, I donate 2 beds, 3 beds, 4 beds. And the Chavetz Chaim was standing there with his Bachram, and one of the wealthy Balabatim, he got upset. How come the Chavetz Chaim is not giving us a little more cover? These yeshiva Bachram are not giving any beds. How come he's not giving us a little more cover? How come he's standing with them? And he went over to the Chavetz Chaim, and he said, how many beds are they giving? How many beds are the yeshiva bachrim giving? So the Chavetz Chaim says they're giving 50 beds. So the Gvir said, I'm a man of means. I can give 5 beds. They don't have a cent to their name. How could they give 50 beds? Chavetz Chaim says, you don't understand. It's because of them we can make a smaller hospital. If they weren't learning, we need a hospital of 200 beds. Because they're learning, we can make a hospital of 150 beds. Sha'aleim ha'olam eskayim. They're holding up the world. Rabbi Elyashiv held up our world. Our Yesodis now are weak. One, Rabbi Elyashiv was Rabbi Elyashiv. Asmanas HaTorah. One story that he was also a good husband. There was a Shiloh once, they had a new way of harvesting grapes. They had a new machine to harvest grapes. And the question is, at what point does the guy have to stop running the machine? At one point shouldn't it be done by a guy because of Yain Esef. And it was hard to explain to Rabbi Elyashiv exactly how the machine worked. And he was asking to go to the vineyards and see the machine in action, to be able to paskin how to use the machine and at what point the guy should stop using it. The day he was supposed to go, he got sick and he couldn't go, but they needed somebody to paskin on the machine. So what they decided was to take a video of the machine while it's working from all angles. A total video of exactly everything that's going on with this machine and how it works. And they took a video. It was the first time that a video was coming into Rabbi Elyashiv's house. First time. Rabbi Elyashiv never seen a video. It was a whole thing. So they bring this video into they put it down on the table, and they're about to put it on. And Rabbi Elyashiv says, Rak Rega. 1 minute. Rak Rega. He calls his Rebbitzin. He figured that his Rebbitzin also had never seen a video, and she'd have hana. She would have hana from seeing it. She'd have hana from seeing the video. It says Rak Rega. I want my Rebbitzin to see this. And he called it his Rebbitzin. That's also a big story on Rabbi Elyashiv. It's no less than any of the other stories that they tell about Rabbi Elyashiv. Every second counted by him. Finish off with the story of the Chavetz Chaim. Maybe we'll finish off the story with the Chazal. Chazal tell us, Al Naras Bavel Sham Yashav Negam Bachina. B'Zachreina Esiyim. Sham Yashav Negam Bachina. Chazal Medayim. Sham Yashav Negam Bachina. Sham Yashav Negam Bachina. It happened over there, but it didn't happen before. Chazal say like this: Kivin shehigia Yirmiyahu in the Har Pros. Nevuzaradin was taking Kollel Yisrael to the Har Pros. He was putting them on ships and taking them, and Yirmiyahu accompanied Kollel Yisrael to Golos. When they came to Har Pros, Ona Nevuzaradin, so Nevuzaradin turns to Yirmiyahu. I'm giving you the option. You could either come to Bavel or go back to Eretz Yisrael. He gave Yirmiyahu the option. Chashav Yirmiyahu b'liboy. Yirmiyahu started thinking, if I'm going to go to Bavel, ein menachem legolis hanisha mehem. There were still Jews in Eretz Yisrael. So Yirmiyahu decided to stay with the Jews, to be menachem the Jews who were staying in Eretz Yisrael. So he turned around and started walking back. Notlu hagolis as a name. The Jews who were about to go to Bavel lifted their eyes. Veroes Yirmiyahu shapir shmehem. And they see Yirmiyahu walking away. Go kulam b'bchi. They all started crying. B'tzavchu, and they started screaming, Rabbeinu Yirmiyahu, Rabbeinu Yirmiyahu, Harei atem menachenu. You're leaving us. How could you leave us? Hariyata menachenu. Shom bachu shenema al naris bavel shav yeshav nigam b'chinu. Honor Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu answered them, v'amar lahem, meir ani alai shamayim v'aretz. I could say witness. Ilu b'chisim b'chiyah aches asher atem b'tziyin loy galisim. If you would have cried once when you were in Eretz Yisrael, before the Gzeira, you would never gotten to Galus. For 40 years I've been speaking to you. For 40 years I'm telling you to do tshuva. And nobody ever shed one tear. Shom yashav negam b'china. This is the first time they cried, 40 years. Ila b'chisim b'chiyah aches she'atem b'tziyin loy galisim. And if they wouldn't have gone to Galus, there would have been no Galus. We wouldn't be in Galus. There would never any been any Galus. Ila b'chisim b'chiyah achas. One b'chiyah. We lost Eretz Yisrael because of b'chiyah sholchina. The b'chiyah on Tisha B'Av when the Meraglim came back. Atem b'chisim b'chiyah sholchinam afani goyz aleim b'chiyah l'doyres. We cried because we didn't want to go into Eretz Yisrael. We cried because we thought we had to go into Eretz Yisrael where we did not want to go into. That crying brought about the Galus. The crying will bring back the Galus. Ila b'chiyas b'chiyah achas ad she'atem loy galisim. Apesha asar she'apesha hitim. B'chiyah achas. That's all the Eivishter wants, one b'chiyah. And that would bring us back from the Galus. We build with b'chiyas. Jews build with b'chiyas. That's what. If you tell a guy, "Il b'chis and b'chiyah achas asher te'atem galus," you would never gone to galus. A guy would not believe that. What has it got to do? Nebuchadnezzar is standing there with his armies, and he can't defend himself against an army. But if you would have shed one tear, you would have stayed. You would never gone to galus. It's not something that a guy can understand, but every Jew can understand this. It's not the most pashta Jew. This is the most pashta Chazal. He understands it. That one tear would have saved it. And the guy can never understand that. Even a falta. That's the churb. We experienced our own churb. Rabbi Elyashiv was an only child. Like I said before, his parents didn't have children for 17 years. His parents only had one son. One son. When Rabbi Elyashiv died, he had over 1,000 grandchildren. Over 1,000 grandchildren. 1,000 grandchildren. And he attributed to his hatzlacha for the rest of his life. He attributed his hatzlacha to the bracha of the Chafetz Chaim. His father once took him to the Chafetz Chaim when he was 5 years old. And the Chafetz Chaim looked at the child and he saw this child is not Pashut. And he said, you should grow up like your father and like your grandfather. Like the Heilige Baal Hashem. You should grow up like your father, like your grandfather. And somebody once came to Rabbi Elyashiv and asked him for a bracha. So Rabbi Elyashiv used to say always, the Chafetz Chaim had gewusst wie zu geben a bracha. The Chafetz Chaim knew how to give a bracha. You should grow up like your father, like your grandfather. And that's what happened. One child, Doiris. Now, when he died, he had 1,000 Einekach. Kulam G'dayla Torah, Yerushalayim, Tzadikim. Maybe she'll take a help from that. We should be zeicher to cry in Tisha B'Av. Those crying should be connected to the Eibush. Those crying should rebuild the Beis HaMikdash.
חוכמה מעין תמצא באיזה מקום ידע אשר אדם מצא חוכמה לאדם יפיק תבונה מה לא טוב כתובך אשר צפת דרך חדלה חוסים בך נגד בן אדם היקר חסדך אלוהים לפני אדם סוף נראה יחוסיון ירגון מידי שמדך ונחל עדנך תשכם טוב שמי שמדוב יומי ויומי ולדוב סוף דבר הכל נשמע את אלוהים יראה בית משתף שמור כי זה כל אדם יעלו שחק שבחוות ינם משכב אדם מנוחה נכונה בשבלינה בנת קשים ותורים כזוהר הרקיע מהירים מסלים וחילוץ הזמין קרבות השמים והרחקת פשע וקראת ישע וחמלה וחנם לפני שוכן יהודה וחוקת ולכונם הבא שם תהיה מנת מחיצת ישבת נפש השם בטוב המרוחם רבי יוסף שלום בן רבי אברהם רוח אדוני תניחנו בגן עדן נתפטר מהמעדן קראת אלה רבי שמי ברא מלך מלכים מלכים רחמים רחמים נפקוש ורחם עליו מלך מלכי המלכים רחמים יסדו בסל כנביו צל לו לחזור בנועם אדוני וגר כל הקץ ימין יעמדם נחת אדם משקהו סלום של רחמים נשמדו אביסים כל מלכי אדוני נחתו גלה פלה ושלום ויד משקל בשלום נהיה בשלום ונוכל משקדם נדחו בכל מיני חושבים בו בכלל רחמים וסליחות כן יהי רצון ונאמר אמן רבי חנניה בן עקשיא אומר עשה הקדוש ברוך הוא לזכות את ישראל לפיכך קיבלת תורה משה שלמען אדוני חפץ למען רבי אדיר